Welcome to the IDEXX webinar, Generating New Revenues from Testing for Legionella pneumophila. I'm LegAlert Product Manager here at IDEXX. Today in this webinar, we'll be addressing three questions: understanding what is driving growth in Legionella testing today and where that may be going in the future. We'll be talking about what labs need to know about water management plans to address Legionella risk and how testing fits into those. Then we'll be talking about what you want to build into your plan for Legionella testing in your business to make sure you're reducing any possible risk. We'll follow those presentations with time for question and answers. Please feel free to use the question and answer widget that's on your screen to submit questions at any time. We will try to answer as many of those questions as we can in the time allotted at the end of the webinar. And if your question is directed to a specific speaker, please include that in your request. I'm honored to be joined today by two national experts, Tim Keene, the consultant and owner at Legionella Risk Management, who knows pretty much everything there is to know about designing and executing a water management plan, and Adam Green, a partner at Baker & Donaldson and the chair of their Water Technology and Water Treatment Group, who spent a lot of time in this space, again, a real recognized national expert. So why are we here today? Legionnaires disease is here and it's increasing. Cases keep going up. They've quadrupled since the year 2000. Somewhere north of 10,000 people a year are estimated to have legionellosis in some form. And unfortunately, somewhere between 5 and 15% of those cases are deadly. Yet Legionnaires' disease is preventable. 9 out of 10 cases can be prevented by better water management plans. We know that. And it's very clear what the culprit is. It's Legionella pneumophila in water. And whether you look at the CDC statistics here on the screen, you can see the data from all of the cases associated with outbreaks tracked by the CDC over the last 6 years, 99% Legionella pneumophila in water. Whether you look at European data, where they're looking at all culture-confirmed cases, we know what the problem is. And it's a big problem. What's really interesting about this graph here is it shows that where Legionnaires' disease was really not on the radar screen. If you look at those dark, kind of gray, black boxes on the right-hand side, towards the most recent years, you'll see increasing percentage of the waterborne diseases, drinking water-related outbreaks, are caused by Legionella. If you go back to the early 70s there, it's not even on the graph. And now it's the single largest cause of drinking water-related outbreaks. Now, obviously, this is not lost on the media. It's in the news. And probably even more strikingly, the facilities where someone was exposed to the bacteria that caused Legionnaires' disease are in the news. So whether that's Disney, whether it's a hotel, whether it's a local hospital, those facility names are being associated with something that was eminently preventable. Not surprisingly, that means there's around. Litigation's happening for significant sums, whether those are simply claims, whether those are settlements, awards, or even just the legal fees. This map here is just a quick Google search result. And if you type in Legionnaires' disease lawyer, here are places across the country where those little blue dots will pop up. By no means is this exhaustive. Litigation is happening around Legionnaires' disease because it is preventable. Luckily, building owners are increasingly aware that it's something that they need to be on the lookout for. They need to do their part in reducing Legionnaires' disease risk. The ASHRAE Standard 188 made this eminently clear. Building owners and their teams are responsible for reducing this risk. The CDC has done a wonderful job in really helping digest what was in ASHRAE 188 and making it very user-friendly and promoting it so that everyone involved in managing water in facilities or reducing risk in facilities knows the roles that they have to play. So that people who are ultimately responsible for ensuring the safety of the water are becoming more aware of their responsibility. This is increasing the demand for testing. People are starting to say, I need to know what's in my water. At the same time, there are some new, easier ways for them to find out what's in the water with a new, easier culture methods. That means it's easier for more labs across the country, closer in proximity to customers, to be able to offer Legionella testing. And what we're hearing is as more labs start to offer testing, many of them are starting to go one step further. They're finding it's not quite enough to have a listing on their website or to wait for a customer to call to ask to request testing for Legionella pneumophila. They are seeing that labs are actually reaching out to potential customers and promoting this Legionella testing option. So they are increasingly also promoting that they offer Legionella pneumophila testing and that facility owners, building managers should be taking advantage of this service. What does that do? Well, more ads, more awareness, further increases in customer demand. So we see this cycle of more people becoming aware, more labs getting requests, thinking this is something they can offer, more promotion, and ultimately more demand. So IDEXX has test for Legionella pneumophila out in the market for about a year and a half. And so we've heard a lot about what customers are looking for in routine monitoring testing. So what the number one thing that they're looking for is, does it give me the right answer? Is it an accurate test? Does it really help me understand what's going on in my building water? They're also looking for, using this data, understand change over time. They're looking for test results which will help them manage the water, identify that if there's a change in the data, that's because there's a change in the level or location of the bacteria in their facility. It's not because there was a change in the analyst at the bench or a slightly different method used between two different labs. They're looking for data that's going to be very consistent and very reproducible. So it's very reliable trending data. They're looking for data which helps them tell them, do I have a real serious risk here? Do I have something in my water that is highly likely to cause disease when if the right situation arises in terms of who is exposed for how long, etc. They're looking for as quick a response time as they can have. The sooner they get results, the sooner they can take action if that's needed. And that's important. They want to get out ahead of any potential problems. Of course, customers want to meet whatever requirements are in place, whether that's at their state, maybe in their province, if they are part of a larger organization like the Veterans Administration that has requirements for regular routine testing for Legionella pneumophila, they want to make sure that test meets any of those requirements. Of course, they want to make sure their test results stand up in court. So they want to make sure that the lab they're going to has their testing method demonstrated capability. It's on their scope of accreditation. It's something that the court would look at and say, yes, this is a result you should be able to trust as a business owner. They're looking for the culture method. Today, it's still considered the gold standard, and that is what we're hearing most customers are requesting. It is the default action limits are in terms of culture method. They're looking, of course, at something that's cost effective. It always comes into play with a purchase decision. And they're looking for something that will fill in the necessary pieces for their water management plan. Is it going to answer the questions, respond to the scenarios that are laid out in the plan that has been developed according to the ASHRAE 188 standard or the CDC toolkit that the building and the owners have put together and approved? And I'm delighted to welcome now Tim Keene, who will be able to speak in much more detail about the water management plan and the role that testing plays in a water management plan that can really reduce risk for the public.
Kristen, thank you for that introduction. I'd like to give a little background on what's been going on with Legionella in the industry over the past 20 or 30 years. This is a slide I use frequently when I'm presenting. Talk about TMLAC, the three-monkey approach to Legionella control. If we test the water, we'll find Legionella. If we find it, we must do something. So the best thing to do is nothing. And surprisingly, that is still more often than not thought of as a good defensible way for handling Legionella in building water systems. One of the problems has been information that's been gotten out to the industry. Here's a MMWR report from CDC from August of 2015. It says in 2011 to 2012, among 21 Legionella outbreaks in community water systems, 67% occurred in hospitals or healthcare facilities, illustrating the disproportionate disease burden among hospitalized persons who are more likely to be older or have underlying conditions that increase their risk of developing Legionnaire's disease. This information is factually correct, but it gives the healthcare industry the incorrect information that because hospitals have sick people, there's nothing you can do. And in fact, it's because hospitals are more likely to have Legionella in their building water systems that is a major role in this rate of illness. CDC finally got involved and took command of the issue this year, issuing this memorandum that said all healthcare facilities, hospitals, and nursing homes must have a risk management plan for Legionella control. And CMS is a tremendous amount of power in the healthcare industry. They're the ones that pay for Medicaid and Medicare. And if you lose your CMS certification, you lose your Medicaid and Medicare repayments, and that would shut many hospitals down immediately. So CMS carries a huge stick, and this has got an immediate impact. Nor can the healthcare industry ignore this issue. What's necessary in a water management plan? You have to establish a program team, and these are items listed in the ASHRAE guideline, which is what CMS recommended in their memorandum. Describe the building water system using text and flow diagrams. Identify areas where Legionella could grow and spread. Decide where control measures should be applied and how to monitor them. Establish ways to intervene when control limits are not met. Make sure the program is running as designed and is effective. This is the validation step, and this is the area where monitoring through cultures comes into play. And lastly, document and communicate all the activities. So the fourth part, control measures, might be looking at chlorine levels or temperatures throughout the building water system. And the sixth point is actually testing for Legionella. That's not stated in any of the documents that you have to test for Legionella, but common sense says if you're validating a Legionella risk management plan, then culturing would be the way to go, some type of method of identifying the bacteria levels. It discusses in the CMS document and the CDC documents where Legionella can come from. Potable water and non-potable water is both issues. Cooling towers, decorative fountains, ice machines, sinks and showers, hydrotherapy equipment, and medical equipment. Testing for a cooling tower might take 1 or 2 samples. A decorative fountain might be testing 1 water sample for a validation test. Ice machines, there may be 2 or 3 dozen in a hospital. And then when you come to the potable water systems, you're typically talking at a minimum 12 samples assorted throughout the facility to get some type of validation summary. So what makes a good water management plan? What are the components that need to be implemented? First, it should be developed by competent personnel that know what they're doing and have an idea of what are the factors that are in play. Second, it should include an audit of the plumbing system by a knowledgeable engineer to identify risk factors in the plumbing system, either the potable water system or the cooling tower system, or even the ornamental fountain system. Next, the plan should look at what are cost-effective mechanical solutions to address identified risks, and wherever possible, you want to solve problems mechanically that you can. Healthcare facilities also require a clinical control plan. That's not listed in the CMS memorandum. I believe that will be updated shortly, but that is recommended in the CDC Environmental Infection Control Guidelines published in 2003. And that basically says, look at your patients and test them when they show signs of pneumonia if they have risk for Legionnaire's disease. Next, implementation of a maintenance plan, including control limits. So when you identify issues, cooling tower, ornamental fountain, or potable water system, you're going to want to maintain certain levels of biocides or temperatures to minimize the risk. And then monitoring of those established control limits by facility personnel on a routine basis. So in a potable water system, for instance, checking the temperature of your hot water at fixtures in the building, checking temperatures of maybe free chlorine at least once or twice a week. And then lastly, validating results. So you've established your control limits. You've identified that, say, maintaining 120 degrees Fahrenheit throughout the hot water system is what you want to do to control the Legionella. But to validate that those controls are working, you want to actually test the water for Legionella to identify and confirm that your limits are giving you the results. And then the intent, what are the drivers here, is risk reduction and liability reduction. Legionnaire's disease is the new asbestos. It's resulting in a tremendous amount of litigations. Building owners and managers, for instance, if they want insurance for waterborne pathogens, it used to be people would get environmental riders only for airborne pathogens such as mold. Now insurance companies and insurers are recommending waterborne pathogens as well for an environmental insurance rider. And then there's litigations involved with facility owners and managers, and in some cases, large corporations that are renting spaces will require the building owners and managers to do Legionella testing. In healthcare facilities, as I mentioned already, it's a CMS requirement in addition to a huge impact on litigation and liability. Those developing water management plans want to make sure that the plan is effective, and there's also the insurance requirements that might be required for those as well. For water treaters, this is a big interest because if they're getting involved in the liability and the potential litigation, so they want to make sure that what they're doing works. And it's also a way of increasing revenue. And public health officials, they want to, whenever they're looking at testing and identifying the disease, they want this data. They want to collect culture data to identify what strain, what amounts of bacteria, what percent positives are identified in the water system. And when you do this, when you implement these systems, as was shown in an outbreak previously, a case was brought to trial, and the judge threw the negligence portion of the case out of the trial, saying that the guests could not sue the hotel for negligence because the facility had a risk management plan in place. So the benefits have already been documented of having a risk management plan in place through this litigation. What testing should be done for plan validation? 90% of Legionnaires' disease is attributed to Legionella pneumophila serogroup 1. That's the strain most likely to cause illness, the strain most likely to be identified in water systems. If you identify Legionella pneumophila serogroup 1, you know you've got the worst strain there, and that's already identified in the water system. Then to do validation testing, any LP positive result will tell you that you have a risk in the water system and you need to take action. You want to ensure the concentration and the percent positive of Legionella pneumophila in the samples collected do not exceed plan limits. Some places use 30% positive if you collect 10 samples, and 3 or more positive, you figure the system is significantly, if not systemically, colonized with Legionella, and you need to take action. And it doesn't matter whether the results are in CFU or equivalent MPN. If non-serogroup 1 strains of Legionella pneumophila are identified, serotyping may be required. If a building only has, say, Legionella pneumophila serogroup 5, which is less likely to be associated with illness, and you're doing a maintenance testing program, then you might want to know if you still only have Legionella pneumophila serogroup 5. If the strains change and you identify Legionella pneumophila serogroup 1, you might want to take more aggressive actions. And then, of course, routine maintenance testing for plan validation, whether it's once a year, twice a year, or once a quarter, depending on the risk factors identified and if there's been any previous illness identified. Sample collection is an important part of the program. Going on site and collecting samples, it might be a technician or a water treater. If isoplate method is used, it recommends and in some cases requires 1 liter sample for full Legionella analysis. Many labs still use smaller sample volumes, but the difference between collecting 250 milliliters versus a 1 liter sample size is significant for those collecting the samples. You're talking about with 1 liter bottles and 15 bottles, a 33-pound box that's carried on a cart. For the same amount, you're talking about an 8-pound box that's carried by hand. So that's a significant difference as well. When I'm collecting samples and using a laboratory, I look at if the laboratory is accredited, uses a reliable method, provides quick turnaround, is responsive, cost effective is important, easy to read reports, electronic reports through email or online, e-commerce simplicity. I'm interested in microbiological analysis and one-stop shop for my microbiology needs as far as bottles and shipping, etc.
Thank you, Tim. That was wonderful. And now I'm going to hand things over to Adam Green, who will take us through the next part of the presentation.
Thank you, Kristen. My name is Adam Green, and as shown on your slide there, I am the chairman of the Water Technology and Water Treatment Group at Baker Donaldson. In other words, I am a trial lawyer. I cannot see you right now, but I presume that you're all standing and applauding that fact. So please take your seats and we'll move forward. just by way of background, for the past 17 years, I've defended some of the worst infectious disease cases on the planet, and those include Legionnaires' disease cases. At the same time, as shown with my practice group, I've defended cases involving cooling technology, condenser water systems, and cooling towers, which, of course, is directly related to Legionella litigation. Over that time, I've had everything from corrosion-based failures in Hawaii to Legionella fatalities in Mississippi to lead in Illinois. We've pretty much seen it all. I recently actually consulted a client regarding Legionella exposure as far as Ireland. So I only mention the breadth of that experience in terms of geography to let you know that my experience across all those different regions has been the same. Along those lines also, we recently defended the first ever Legionnaires' disease case filed in the state of Mississippi and the first ever wrongful death case that was reported against a chemical water treater. And you're thinking, well, I've heard of other water treatment related cases where somebody got Legionnaires' disease and passed away, but this one was actually a reported opinion, which means that we didn't settle. We actually fought it all the way and got a ruling from the court. We defended it at the trial court level in the state of Mississippi and then on up to the United States Court of Appeals in the Fifth Circuit, where we prevailed on appeal, and that was just last year. So what on earth are you talking to a lawyer for? I like this cartoon a lot. What's the good of having lawyers if you can't make fun of them? One of my old trial partners retired, and he sent this out to everybody kind of on his way out the door, and we got a kick out of it. But, as a threshold matter, as a testing lab that may be involved with Legionella, you may be asking, well, what am I doing talking to a trial lawyer and about the legal climate surrounding Legionella? That sounds like a conversation reserved for people who think that they're going to be sued. And you're thinking, hey, I'm a straight arrow, I stand behind my handshake, and my legal perspective as a testing lab is, by gosh, I don't need one because I'm not going to get sued. I'm not going to be at the courthouse. And, I hope that you're right. We really do. The only time I ever want to see a testing lab at the courthouse is as a fact witness, where you're testifying about what it was that you saw in the sample and the results that you came up with from your testing. As a retained expert, where somebody has hired you to render your opinion, your expert opinion about what it is that you've seen and what's in the sample. Or a non-retained expert, which is basically more like a fact witness that is not paid, but they want to drive home your expertise, and so they will designate you as a non-retained expert, which basically means you're doing expert work and not getting paid. But the point of that is that those are the only three capacities that we ever want to see you at the courthouse in, as a fact witness, expert witness, or a non-retained expert witness. We do not want to see you there as a party, and that's one of the purposes for this discussion here today. Unfortunately, the legal climate in general today suggests that, by God, you don't have to do anything wrong to get sued anymore, other than have money and be present. And this is especially true with respect to Legionella, as what we have found and experienced. And I'll walk you through some real-world case studies and scenarios where that's shown up. There are a few recurring themes that make the legal climate for Legionella cases challenging. And one of them is that the subject matter is just inherently complex. It's technical. And your target audience, which, most of the time your target audience should be the premises owner, the person that you're actually doing the test for. A lot of times in our experience, they really don't understand the complexity of this. And, my experience down at the courthouse has been the same. If you find yourself at the courthouse, my experience in defending these cases is that the judges and the juries, they really don't have any background or reference for this subject matter either. I mean, if you think about the topic, you've got a subject matter that is technical, involving chemistry, engineering, microbiology, sometimes principles of metallurgy. This is not something that you can easily get your head around with no background experience. So one of the risks is that your target audience, whether it's the owner that you're doing testing for, or if, by some hook or crook you find yourself at the courthouse, is that the judge or the jury or the owner will not understand your role or purpose, and ultimately what that manifests in is them alleging that you're responsible for some duty that you didn't undertake. And I see this a lot. I especially see this a lot with water treatment. In a litigation setting, the old adage is that the simplest argument is the best one. And so if you think about this thing, if you're at the courthouse, which we hope you will never be, who would you rather be defending? Would you rather be the lawyer like me who's standing up there arguing high science and talking about the rapid recolonization behavior of this bacterium, or would you rather be the lawyer who's standing up for the plaintiff saying, I don't know a whole lot about this chemistry stuff, and their expert says X, my expert says Y. You don't have to believe any of them. All I know is that people should be able to go stay at a hotel without getting sick and dying. It's really difficult to overcome arguments like that, but we've had success with that in the past, and I just wanted to paint the picture of what that looks like. So we're going to talk about some simple things today about clearly defining your role and purpose and where that role ends. As it turns out, Legionella litigation is evolving right before our eyes. We live in very interesting times. I had several cases pending while ASHRAE 188 was on the books, and I actually had 2 cases pending when ASHRAE 188 was passed in June of 2015. And so it's very rare to encounter that where the law and the standards are actually being developed concurrently with the litigation, but that's where we live right now. And, it really does feel a lot like the Wild West right now, especially with respect to allegations and the damages involved. I've never seen a Legionella case where the damages were less than 7 figures. And you may ask yourself, okay, well, why are the damages so high? Usually they involve wrongful death, which, is terrible as it sounds and is going to have high value associated with it. But, one of the things that is fairly consistent through all these cases, with, remote exception, is that usually the plaintiffs who are involved and who were exposed, they didn't do anything wrong. And so when you have somebody who's been injured and didn't do anything wrong, what do you call them? You call them victims. And that's just tough to overcome. Sometimes that's all a jury needs to hear, and everything else is just kind of noise. It's just yada, yada, yada. I feel bad for these people. They have sympathy on their side, if you will. So that's one of the reasons these cases are so challenging and why the damages are so high. But, the allegations have gotten pretty far-reaching and a little bit off the rails. For example, if it's on your screen, this is a recent case that was filed just here in October. And in this case, a California man alleges that a Caesars hotel in Las Vegas failed to disclose that Legionella bacteria was present in its water system to guests that stayed there earlier in the year. And they had an outbreak being defined as 2 or more people that are injured or exposed. They had an outbreak, and those people, thankfully, both recovered. But this lawsuit is not about anybody who got sick. This lawsuit is a class action lawsuit for anyone who stayed in the hotel from March of 2017 to June of 2017. And like I said, there was no illness. The allegations are that if the hotel had told them that there was Legionella present, they would have had the opportunity to negotiate a better room rate, or go stay somewhere else. That's their damages. Well, you just didn't tell me that there was this risk of harm there. So essentially we have people who were not injured seeking what damages what are alleged by the defense to be over $5 million. We've kind of gone off the rails here. I understand that people would feel that they want to be told and informed that there's a risk of harm, but in this case, that risk was never realized. But nonetheless, a creative lawyer has filed a lawsuit and is now seeking millions of dollars for people who didn't get sick. So, this is representative of what's going on right now in the Legionella litigation world. And it's not just with respect to the allegations. One of the truisms I've had with most cases that involve cooling technology or condenser water systems or cooling towers is that when the owner is pegged on this, when they are culpable, they'll tag everybody. The parties who are implicated, it's always the primary defendant is almost always the premises owner, which in your case, as a testing lab, may be your direct client. The owners always get sued, it seems, because in most states, owners have a non-delegable duty to provide a safe premises for their invitees and their guests. A common example is like security guards. A hotel owner can't have a dangerous premises where they know that bad things have happened in the past and there's criminal history. And then when they get sued for something bad happening to one of their guests, they can't say, well, that's not on us. We hired this $200 a week rent-a-cop. You go sue that guy. Courts are not typically going to accept that. That doesn't really wash. And so because of that, when a premises owner it's kind of like a person drowning in the middle of the ocean. They're going to look for any port in a storm. And how that manifests in Legionella litigation is that pretty much everybody who ever walked a shift on that job site. I don't know if you've ever heard the expression that there are no atheists in foxholes. Well, as it turns out, there are no friends in the courtroom. In most cases, despite good relationships, the owner or their counsel is going to, try to get as many people on that jury form as possible so that they're not the only one. They want to try to diminish their proportionate share of liability by implicating anyone who is involved with the cooling water system, no matter how unrelated to Legionella. And in my experience, that includes everybody that's on your screen, whether it's the chemical water treater who got paid $200 a month to come out there once every month, building maintenance people who may be more adept at screwing in light bulbs and changing out blinds than anything to do with the microbiology of the system. I have not yet seen a testing lab implicated, and I'm knocking on wood over here because I hope I never do. For instance, someone being sued for failure to conduct testing appropriately, or failing to follow protocols, or misreporting results, or undertaking some analysis and doing it poorly, or a testing lab undertaking advising a premises owner about what they should do, and having that advice followed and alleged to be incorrect. I haven't seen that yet, and it is one of the purposes of this presentation to try to keep it that way. Most of the time, the innocent parties who are on the premises are implicated because the role of that defendant is nowhere defined, or it's defined in an overstated fashion. And while I've not seen a testing lab implicated, I have seen very limited role and very limited paying crafts implicated. And you think about this, the premise of any business relationship is that your reward should be commensurate with the risk that you're taking. They should be about even, as is shown on the chart on the first diagram. In the Legionella context, if you're implicated, that risk-reward relationship becomes grossly disproportionate, almost to a level of being offensive. In a prior case that I recently had, one of the testing labs that was involved was getting about $400 per test, and the damages in that case were over $5 million. So if you think about how disproportionate that is, these cases are very dangerous, just inherent in their nature, because the allegations are so grave and serious. And for a small business, which many of the testing labs that I've dealt with before are, these can become bet the company type lawsuits very quickly. So we want to be sure, whether we're a testing lab or really any business, that we know all of the risks that we're undertaking and that we're being paid commensurate with those risks. One example of a grossly disproportionate risk-reward relationship was a case that I had where we had, it was a small boutique hotel, and you had 5 people exposed to Legionella from the cooling tower, which was on the 2nd floor, and they alleged that the drift went down into the smoker's porch where the plaintiffs were out there having a cigarette, and 5 were exposed, 2 people tragically passed away, and I defended a chemical water treater who was paid about $190 a month to go out there and kick the drums and check on levels, and they didn't have a contract. There was no writing in place. It was a handshake deal. They were old friends, and the water treater's purpose had nothing to do with Legionella. He says, I'm there to minimize water costs and increase system efficiency by eliminating scale and corrosion. That was his only job. But because there was no writing stating that role or purpose, when his old buddy, the premises owner, got sued for these fatalities, we went to the any port in a storm phenomenon, and it became this huge red light swearing contest about what conversations they had about what he was taking care of and what the purpose of the treatment program was. And so because there was no contract or no writing that stated his role or responsibility or limited those responsibilities, he was sued for over $20 million. And notably, in absence of a writing, the plaintiffs were looking for anything they could find, the plaintiffs' lawyers were, and they actually went to my client's website where Legionella-related services were mentioned. And so in absence of a formal writing or a contract, they tried to use that website to argue that my client had undertaken some duty and that because Legionella services were offered, even though we were not hired to do that on this job, that we should have done it unilaterally and saved them from themselves. Save me from myself is kind of a recurring theme throughout the cases that I've had in my career. But I would be very cautious. One of the takeaways here is to be very cautious about what you put on your website. I've seen a lot of statements from a lot of companies about, hey, we're in the life-saving business. You know, we are saving lives. And you have to know, and hopefully you never will, but if you're ever hailed into court in a Legionella context, Exhibit 1 in that case is going to be photographs of the deceased. And they're terrible. I've never seen one that wasn't a tearjerker. And just to put it in a manner of speaking, these are not Facebook photos. But that'll be Exhibit 1, or photos of the deceased. Exhibit 2 will be your website saying, hey, we're in the business of saving lives. So I'd be very cautious about bold representations on the web because they can jump up and bite you. So really what we're getting at here is clearly stating what your role is. I mean, this is the best way, I believe, to avoid being implicated. It's important to define your role. What are we doing and for what purpose? And it doesn't have to be some yellow page sized document. You know, as a lawyer, I can draft you a contract that's the greatest contract in the history of the universe. And if it's the size of the yellow pages, it's not worth the paper it's written on because nobody's going to sign it. So these do not have to be treatise-sized documents. They can be short and sweet and just say, hey, here's what I'm responsible for, and I'm going to stand behind my handshake. It should be cut and dry. You know, hopefully it says we're going to test and report with a disclaimer that the results are only as good as the sample taken and are only representative of a snapshot of what was in the water at the time the sample was taken. I mean, this really should be a limited role, limited pay, limited risk undertaking. And then importantly, where does it end? Where do those responsibilities end? I would say that they're equally important as the stated purpose and the role, if not more so. I mean, are we undertaking sampling? If not, we need to say that this is not what we do. Are we giving advice based on our findings? And this can be kind of a gray area. You know, are you simply reporting raw data results and letting the water management team decide what to do with it, or are you giving advice to the premises owner? You know, if you're going to undertake giving advice or being part of this water management team, by God, you should be paid to do those functions. We need to say so. We need to state what we do. We need to clarify what role we've undertaken. You know, if you're not doing any of these things, simply state, this is not what we do. Or you can state it very clearly. These are the things that we do. We test and report. We're disclaiming, everything based on the fact that we didn't take the sample. We're only as good as the data, as the sample we're given, and that's it. And we disclaim all other responsibilities. I mean, even that could do the trick. But it's important to have that there because when an owner's put in a situation of duress and they're under fire for people dying, you don't want to be implicated because they're operating under the assumption that you were handling more than you were. I don't know if you document the CDC document that kind of informs how to do 188 and a water management team. And when I look at this document, and I think when plaintiffs' lawyers look at this document about the roles of the water management team, I see a pinwheel of defendants, potential defendants, if you will, right or wrong. I see people who could be implicated, regardless of whether or not they're actually culpable. And so the bottom line is if you're going to be part of the water management team, you need to be paid commensurate with that risk. If you're going to be a free agent and just say, hey, I'm not really part of your team, I'm just doing the mechanical act of testing and reporting, then I think that's a different strata of risk. So I would be wary of that, or at least figure out how to monetize it, because, back to our risk-reward analysis, if you're going to undertake the risk, you should be rewarded commensurate with that risk. So, the moral to the story is that I would not operate a business in the Legionella space without a contract that clearly states your role and purpose and disclaims anything beyond that. It can be a simple document, like I said before, not the yellow pages. If you're going to offer a service beyond that, you need to identify and label those so that they can be monetized. You don't want to miss an opportunity to be paid because you're operating under the owner's assumptions about your scope of service. Another thing that's really important here is conduct. Courts, if you're ever at the courthouse, they're not just going to look at the paper. They're going to look at what you did. So if we've disclaimed, hey, we're not providing any advice to the premises owner about the test or what they should do with this data, we're just passing along the data, by gosh, don't write 20 emails and have 20 stacks of evidence showing all of this great advice that you gave to the hotel owner, because now, even though you've said in your contract that we don't do that, you've undertaken that duty. And it, like it says on the slide here, if it looks like a duck and sounds like a duck, it walks like a duck, it probably is a duck. So you don't want to say, hey, I'm not part of the water management team, and then do things that functions on the water management team would do. We need to be very clear that we act in accordance with our contract agreement. It's funny, back in my case in Mississippi, I had my water treater had no agreement, and he never mentioned Legionella one way or the other. And they tested water out there for like 9 years, and there was no mention of Legionella because they weren't paid to do it, didn't offer that service. And then after the exposures occurred and people got sick and died, it was important for the court, it was an important fact to the court that the owner, upon learning that there was a Legionella outbreak, he never called the treater and said, hey, what's going on? I hired you guys to handle this. He never called, never wrote, never did anything. He just happened to see my guy out on the job site doing a routine monthly testing and brought it up. And, the fact that there was no outrage, that there was no indignation, that was an example of conduct that the court looked at that said, you know what? There was no expectation they were going to do any Legionella-related service. So that was an instance where the conduct was good for the defense, but, that gun bucks as hard as it shoots. If you're not careful on the other side, it can jump up and bite you. So that's really the quick and dirty version of this. You want to be sure in working with your partners that you, one, choose your partners thoughtfully, but that you choose your role thoughtfully and that you price it according to the risk-reward relationship. I'm seeing too many people involved with Legionella-related functions that are getting paid less than $1,000 and have the risk of being implicated for a whole lot more. You want to be sure to define and document your roles, and you want to keep your documents updated. I mean, it's important to have excellent record keeping with respect to these tests, and a lot of owners will tell you that that's really what they're after, is they want that record showing that they minded their P's and Q's, and it's all in writing because, God forbid somebody gets sick, all of that will become relevant. So I hope this is helpful. This is a 20-minute version of a 10,000-foot aerial view, but I'm happy to answer any questions at the end, and I will turn it back over to Kristen. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Adam. That was great. And it's so important because testing laboratories are key to reducing the risk of Legionnaire's disease throughout our country. So very important you're able to perform your role very well. So before we move on to a quick summary of what do we hear today, we learned a little bit about what is driving the increasing demand for testing for Legionella pneumophila and now and in the future. We heard a little bit about the context for testing and how important that is, that informs and validates a water management plan that is complete and designed to reduce public health risk. And then we learned a few ways that any testing lab, small or large, can really carefully define its offerings, describe what it's going to provide, and define its roles to make sure that it is able to do its job effectively in testing and reporting results. We're going to go in just a moment to questions, but before we do, I'd like to do a little ad for our next webinar. And then we're going to be focusing on how do you launch and get people excited about your Legionella pneumophila offering. We're going to be doing another webinar in late January of 2018. And we're going to cover three things. One, what are some of the different options you have as a laboratory to add Legionella pneumophila testing to your scope of accreditation? How might you find some of the partners who might be valuable to you for water management plan partners? How might you identify some tools that you can point people to so that testing that you deliver is in the context of an effective plan? And finally, what are some marketing strategies, tools, tactics that don't have to cost much but can be incredibly effective in getting the word out about the services that you want to offer? So you'll get an invitation by email. In the meantime, if you have any questions about the Legionella test, of course you can visit the IDEXX website. And feel free to talk to your IDEXX account representative if you'd like to brainstorm on ways that IDEXX can help you with marketing support for your testing of Legionella pneumophila and growing your business. Thanks again to our presenters. We are now going to move into the question and answer section of the webinar. And just a reminder that you can still submit a question by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And we'll be getting to as many of these as we can. Thank you very much for the submissions. And I'll go ahead and get started with the first question, which is a question for Adam. So that is, for a lab that is new to Legionella testing, is the legal risk manageable, or is it something we should really worry about?
Thank you, Kristen, for the question. And I believe the risk is absolutely manageable. As I stated during the presentation, I've been around Legionella litigation since the beginning. I have not seen a testing lab implicated or sued as a party. I've never seen a testing lab involved in a Legionella case in a capacity other than that as a fact witness or as an expert witness. And I think that it can stay that way. Things are changing a little bit because in prior lawsuits, testing labs were not involved except on the back end. They were brought in after outbreaks most of the time, almost in a remedial capacity to try to identify where the bacterium was located, within a particular system. And so the work was on the back end. Now with ASHRAE 188 and people doing work on the preventive side up front, the risk that I see, especially with how loose the allegations are getting these days, is having you be implicated if there is a water management plan in place and, despite best efforts by some hook or crook, somebody still gets sick. I think in that instance that they're going to name everybody, and then even though you may ultimately be proven innocent, you still have to incur fees to work your way out of a lawsuit. I think the best way to manage that risk is to have a very simply stated role and responsibility in a very direct contract. And if you're just getting started, sometimes it's easier when you're just getting started to form a relationship that's a little bit more formal based on a contract. I operate a lot in the water treatment space, and some of these guys have had handshake deals for years and years. And so to try to change from the informal handshake deal over to a formal contract type relationship can sometimes be off-putting to the people that are in those relationships. Sometimes, if you have a handshake arrangement or a friendly relationship with a client and you've always operated on your word, if you will. I'm from the South. On your word is a big deal down here. if you try to formalize that and move to paper, a more formal relationship, sometimes people are thinking, well, what's going on? You don't trust me anymore. And it's really not that at all. What you're trying to do is protect yourself, and you're also trying to educate them because, as we mentioned during the presentation, this is kind of a complex subject matter. So in the name of educating and kind of putting into print what it is that we do and what it is that we don't, that's the best way to manage that risk. The other hidden gem in that is that if you separately monetize your different services, this is an opportunity to educate your client about the different services you offer and actually be paid for the work that you're doing in that respect. As I've drafted agreements over the years, the favorite provision for all my clients now is the quote-unquote other services provision. So, you have the scope and purpose in the contract up front that says, hey, this is what we do and this is what we don't, but we do offer other services that are not covered by this agreement. And that does two things. One, it limits your responsibility to the scope and subject matter that you've listed in the early parts of the document. But two, it kind of tells everybody, hey, this is what else we do. And there may be an opportunity for you to monetize that, whether you're doing it yourself or you're working with a partner. So that's how I would manage that risk, and I do believe it's absolutely manageable. So, Kristen, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Adam. So I have a next question here for Tim. For labs that are interested in generating this Legionella pneumophila testing business, how do they find water safety plan providers that they can work with who do that other piece of the work?
One place where suppliers go to the water treatment industry is the AWT. That's the Association for Water Treatment Suppliers. They have annual meetings, and they also have a magazine that you can advertise in or attend the annual meetings and have a booth that you can advertise in. That would be the thing that comes to my head quickly. I'm sure there might be other avenues, but AWT would definitely be one of the best.
Okay. There's a question here we noticed in the CDC sample collection guidelines that biofilm samples could be collected along with water samples from a given system, and question whether IDEXX has an analysis technique for swab samples. So the answer is that Legionella is validated for water use. There are a number of laboratories that have also been using Legionella to do analysis of swab samples, and that's something we can provide a little more information on. But again, this has been validated for work with water. Another question here that's come in is, do you see Legionella becoming part of community and non-community public system monitoring, much like current coliform bacteria requirements? And that is something that is very much it's the jurisdiction of the EPA. So that is going to be determined by the U.S., whether the EPA updates the bacterial targets that are associated with the regulations that are part of the Safe Drinking Water Act. And so there's a process, and EPA does undertake updates to this on a regular basis. So it's certainly out there, and there's a lot of conversation about it. I think that remains to be seen how that will proceed. So we've got just about another minute or two for questions. Question here is, on the other side, and perhaps this is a question for both. Tim, maybe you want to take a first look at this, and then Adam. What are risks to the utility for Legionella being in a building's water system? How does that kind of play for the utility that might be involved?
This is Tim. I'll respond. At this point, Legionella is listed as an MCLG, a goal for EPA to include for future requirements for municipal water systems to test and maintain. At this point, it's not required, as Kristen mentioned. There have been multiple outbreaks associated with water systems in some extent, either due to a pipeline disruption or a pipe maintenance or a pipe failure. And in these cases, the Water Authority, because there is no EPA requirement, to my knowledge, has not been involved in any litigations where there's been a loss. I know they've been brought into some, but I don't know that they've lost any litigations, and I'll let Adam respond if he's got any additional comment.
Yeah, to echo what you said, Tim, I'm also not aware of any litigation in that respect. Most of the cases that I've had, the root source of the Legionella has come from city water supply. The recent one I'm thinking of, there was a storm that created a disturbance, and there was speculation about whether or not there was biofilm that was harboring bacterium that was shifted or released, and that went through from the city water supply into the subject hotel where we had people got sick. In the courthouse, the way that shakes out, depending on the allegations and how they're framed, a lot of times city authorities will have some sort of immunity, but that does not mean that they're not a critical component of the lawsuit, because if you ever served on a jury and seen a case go all the way through trial, there's a question at the end in a negligence context that says, do you find that the negligence of the following people caused or contributed to the occurrence? And if so, please apportion a percentage. And the percentages must total 100%. So if you have a case where you have, let's say one of the parties is a hotel, the premises owner. Two would be, let's say, the chemical water treater is implicated. Three, let's say the cooling tower manufacturer is implicated. And party number four, even though they may not be required to pay money as an operation of law by virtue of some immunity, would be the city. And so the jury can still apportion a percentage of responsibility onto that city, even though they're not actually going to pay money, if that makes sense. So that's my 2 cents on that issue. I'm not aware of any requirements, just like Tim said, but I do think that they are coming. I think that we've seen kind of response at a city level. I think New York is a pretty good blueprint for what you may see in the future, without respect to the merits or how you feel about what they put on the books. There's a lot of misgivings about that. But I do think that we will move that way ultimately. The devil's going to be in the details as to how that will manifest, but I think you can expect to see that someday.
And I've got one final question here. I'll direct this one to Tim. What type of additional PPE is required? Safety precautions and engineering controls for labs that are handling potential Legionella pneumophila samples? Tim, I'm just double checking you're not on mute.
Oh, yep, I'm here. I'm sorry. I'd just like to add a comment quickly on the tail end of what Adam said. For those that were listening, to do the math on what he said, if there's a litigation and somebody just, instead of 4 people, sues 2 people, a municipality and, say, a building owner, and the judge rules that each were 50% culpable, and the award is $1 million, and the municipality is indemnified for $25,000, then the award is actually $500,000 from the building owner and $25,000. So in a lot of these cases, the municipality will not be sued because it does impact the final outcome of payment. As far as PPE equipment, we did make some comments, I believe, in ASHRAE 188. I've been an original committee member of ASHRAE 188 since the first day it was developed. And there is some guidance in OSHA as well. Basically, Legionella is a waterborne pathogen that has to be transferred in a water droplet. So if you're using any type of paper filter, it will be extremely effective in getting rid of the Legionella. So in field applications, we basically tell people in the field to use an N95 mask, and they don't really need to do anything else unless they're inside or extremely near a cooling tower, where then they should use a fitted a half face mask. In a lab condition, that's a little bit beyond my expertise, what's requirement for lab. Kristen might be able to answer that one, but I could tell you what I just said would go for anybody working in testing in the field or doing equipment tests or maintenance in the field. Go ahead, Kristen.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I actually have Dan Broder from our R&D team sitting here with us on the webinar, so I'm going to give him a chance to answer that quickly from a lab perspective. If there's anything additional PPE when you're a lab handling potential Legionella pneumophila samples.
Thanks, Kristen, and hello, everybody. So in general, working with samples that may contain Legionella pneumophila, you take standard microbiological safety measures in place. Typically, things like gloves and a lab coat are usually what most people use when they run these types of samples. And if laboratories have a biosafety cabinet that is fitted with negative air pressure, that's also suitable to use. But in general, those are the limits of what kind of personal protection that people typically use.
Thank you, Dan. So we appreciate those folks who stayed on. We've gone a little over our 1 hour. Wanted to make sure we got at least a few of the questions answered. Those that were not answered live, thank you for submitting them. We will get back to you with responses directly. And I wanted to do a quick reminder that we will be doing a webinar talking about accreditation options, talking about how to get the word out if you are offering Legionella pneumophila testing. And we will be doing that, and we'll also be talking about ways to partner with water management plan providers. That will be coming up at the end of January. We're still finalizing that date, but keep an eye out in your email for that. And in the meantime, as questions arise, feel free to reach out to us, and we can try and forward your questions as appropriate or to any member of the IDEXX team. Thanks so much for attending today, and for everything you do to reduce Legionnaires' disease risk. And thanks especially to Adam and to Tim. Your years and years of experience in this field, tremendously valuable, and we greatly appreciate your sharing just a little bit of that expertise with everyone on the webinar today.